Hello and welcome to a LinkedIn Live with myself, Garth Sharif, in a different location than I normally am here for LinkedIn Live. I am traveling, delivering training, so I've decided, can I take this show on the road? And I'm going to give it a go, and hopefully technology, which is my biggest concern, works out with me, and my background is a little different than it normally is. But welcome to this LinkedIn Live, very specific LinkedIn Live. For those that follow me, I would say the subject matter expertise that I talk a lot about is right now artificial intelligence, but the other part of my skill set is communication skills and working with the audit profession. So this is specifically for CPAs, for auditors that are right now working on the audits of financial statements and are beginning to see their clients use more artificial intelligence technology, whether it be generative AI, such as Copilot. Most likely, Copilot would be the first thing you might see your clients use because it's embedded within Microsoft apps. So your clients might start to purchase the add-on for Copilot. How they're using it will be very interesting because if you can think about ways, if you can brainstorm ways in which a client, a let's just say a not-for-profit organization, a bank, a manufacturing client, you would want to use Copilot in the way that I've discussed it. Are there things that are difficult to gather and put together that you can get Copilot to do for you, and then you have the ability to analyze that information? And I'm thinking about, let's say, a lease amortization, consolidation. Maybe you can get Copilot within Excel. Maybe it might be an accounting memo. You can get Copilot within Word to help you out as a client. Now, the question for the auditor is, one, do they need to be aware of their client's use of generative artificial intelligence when it comes to financial reporting processes or things that affect accounting assertions? And then the other side of this is how auditors might use these tools themselves to identify and assess the risk of material misstatements. So it's an interesting time for the audit profession, as it is for a lot of professions, in terms of how they will use these tools and how the other side, their clients, the organizations that they audit will use these tools. And why I've decided to have this short LinkedIn Live about this is that we do have in the audit profession an exposure draft on ISA 240, which is the auditor's responsibilities to fraud in the financial statements. And this is a fairly important and I'd say comprehensive exposure draft. If you've read the ISA 240, I operate out of Canada, so the Auditing Assurance Standards Board is looking at, from a Canadian perspective, how much of the standard they want to adopt, what they want to change, amend, and I sit on a committee around that. And my specific focus is on the discussion in the exposure draft around what is referred to as automated tools and techniques. Automated tools and techniques ultimately is a broad term defined in the standards, and that can be automated tools and techniques used by the auditors to gather evidence, to perform risk assessment, or potentially part of the IT systems of the clients. Generally, it's used for automated tools and techniques for how the auditors might use their tools, but sometimes it's confusing. It can be used both ways. And when I look at the standards, I'm going to quickly share my screen and show you what I think is an important document. If you're an audit professional and you haven't read the standard, this is on the International Auditing and Accounting Standards Board's website. And this is the key changes that have been proposed in the exposure draft to 240, which is a big one. And I'll talk about that more broadly as it relates to the audit profession and what it means for this standard, because when we look at this standard, this is the one where there is this expectations gap. What does the public think we're doing around fraud, detecting fraud, especially when we have these large ones that come out, such as FTX and Theranos, which I've talked about in other courses, and what do the standards actually ask us to do? And this expectation gap is real and a challenging one to close for the profession. And from the professional side, the auditor's responsibility is not to discover fraud, but to do procedures around fraud. That's broadly what the standard is trying to say. We have to do procedures to identify, detect fraud, understanding the entity, looking at the IT general controls, looking at fraud at all parts of the asset of the audit, from planning to execution to reporting. But ultimately, this is management's responsibility. And we can only do so much as it relates to fraud risk. So there are things that we have to do. There's required shalls in the ISAs, but in terms of what the public thinks, generally the public thinks, hey, when an audit goes wrong, and or let's say there's a financial statement fraud, why didn't the auditors catch this? Why didn't they do this? And then the auditors have to defend themselves to say, well, this is the way ISA 240 works, this is the way ISA 320 works on materiality. Here are the procedures we did do, but there is an agency, a trust relationship with management that is difficult for sometimes the public to understand when it comes to fraud that's exposed in the public eye. Now we have technology making this relationship more complicated. So in this standard, which I would urge all practitioners just to read through what the proposal is, and in Canada, this is going through commentary. I believe the deadline for providing comments to the exposure draft in Canada is coming to an end in the next week or so. So I'd urge, I'll put the link in LinkedIn Live. I would urge my fellow auditors and Canadian auditors to comment. But if you look at the application material and technology considerations, and there's a lot of paragraphs. I'm not trying to make this a very technical LinkedIn Live because I might lose audience members here, but one of the challenges, what do we need to think about when it comes to technology that's developing? How much do we want to be specific about that technology, because it could get dated very quickly and it takes time for standards to actually come into effect? And so this is one of the aspects, and I'm going to just make this a little bit larger, that the standard setters are trying to do is they're trying to say, where do we get involved with technology and what it means, because it can mean different things, but also what it says here, not dating the standard by referring to technologies that may change or evolve. And that's interesting because generative AI wasn't really a term in the zeitgeist up until ChatGPT. So if we start using generative AI in this standard in terms of what the client uses or what the auditors use, that term in a couple of years may change or evolve. So it's a really challenging space around technology. And then there's also, what is fraudulent activity with technology? I mean, they had examples included in this appendix is cyber crime, but what is cyber crime? What does it relate to privacy? What is it just to use technology to commit regular old financial statement fraud, fraudulent financial reporting? And so the standard is trying to find that place where it's not too specific so it doesn't get dated, to provide guidance on how they may use audit tools and techniques. And the way they're talking about in the standard is how the auditors might use the tools that they might have at their disposal, which right now can include data analytics, but eventually will include generative AI tools that are embedded into methodology. The Big Four are developing this. We see Caseware moving into this space, and how we can use the tools, the AI tools, to potentially look and detect fraud in more advanced ways. But again, as we are getting advanced as auditors, potentially using tools such as generative AI or other artificial intelligence tools to help us identify and detect fraud, our clients are going to become more sophisticated in the way they're going to use technology, and potentially which one is going to, are they going to cancel each other out? Is the client's ability to use technology and potentially cover up fraud or make it hard to detect? An example of this, and I'll give you a quick example, would be one thing in which auditors do, and it's not an artificial intelligence thing, but it's more of a data analytic thing, is we can use a software called IDEA, which is caseware, but there are other softwares for data analytics. You can use Power BI, Tableau, for Benford's law. Benford's law is a sort of this mathematical proof that when we look at a large series of random numbers, there is a proof that we can apply to say that in this large set of random numbers, a 1 would appear more than 2, a 2 would appear more than 3. There's actually a distribution of the numbers that we would expect in random numbers. And the story of how this mathematician in the early 1900s discovered this should be a movie, because it's wild that someone would even think to notice that there's a pattern in random large number data sets. Now, auditors use this for journal entry testing to look for anomalies where someone may have entered a fraudulent journal entry into an accounting information system and they don't know that they are violating Benford's law because they have put a very thought through number into a random number. So Benford's law may detect this as an anomaly. And that's a data analytic. But now that clients have the ability to have data analytics on their own, whether it be Power BI, Tableau, could they understand how they would violate Benford's law and maybe create an entry, maybe multiple entries that would go undetected by Benford's law? It's a bit of a chess match. And again, this is why it's so important that the auditors and management have this trust relationship, because the tools for fraud are increasing, both for detection and for committing fraud. So as I spend time and immerse myself in the generative AI space, something like ISO 240 is of great interest to me because it's one of those things that I could predict, and I don't like to predict and then come back to the video, but where there is a massive fraud that occurs on a public company, there's a dissection of the fraud, and we come to learn that the organization did use technology, analytics, generative AI to help the fraud, to breathe life into the fraud, maybe make it more sophisticated. Then the questions will be for the auditors. What was your move? And we'll have to look, the auditors will always stick to the standards, but what was their use of artificial intelligence? What were their use of data analytics? And again, I'm with the audit profession. Our job is not to detect fraud. I mean, that's almost at a forensic audit level. There's a bunch of complexities for us to be really held accountable to fraud where we did the work and the requirements of the standards. But the public might not see it this way, of course, and that's going to maybe create more change in our profession. So I'm both excited for the tools that auditors have and will have at their disposal. It will allow for more sophistication, more what's called dual purpose testing, where you can, things that you do for risk identification and assessment are also things you can do for executing procedures. But then there's this place where the changes are happening on both sides. What does this mean? And so what's the action step here? Take a look at ISO 240 if you're a professional auditor, and participate in the discussion for if you're in Canada around this. I think it's really important that we as auditors start to be a bit more active in the standard setting in terms of practitioners as we face these changes that are occurring. So thank you. This is a different time and different look. And I know it might have caught some of you off guard because I don't have a whole lot of viewers today. But again, what you can do is catch the recording, watch this later on, and join in the discussion of this. I think this was more to as a thought exercise for the audit profession, to think about what the future is as we enter the space where artificial intelligence, it's just become every day. As I say, Meta has introduced their AI tools into Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram, and that one is harder to remove. It's interesting with Copilot and Gemini, to some degree Gemini and ChatGPT, that there's sort of almost an active, I have to use these or I choose not to turn on generative AI. But what Meta has said is, hey, this should be an inbuilt feature. You don't get to turn it off, even though there are ways to do this. And it's going to be there as part of your WhatsApp, as part of your Instagram, as part of your Meta/Facebook. And again, maybe organizations and corporations like Microsoft, Meta, and Apple and Google won't give us a choice about how to interact. It's an interesting thought process because I've always presented it as a choice that we choose to use artificial intelligence tools, we choose to use generative AI, but what if it's not a choice? What if it's just part of it inside the program and we are not aware of it, but it is there? And that's what Meta is doing, and they're taking a different approach. So that's a bit of a sidebar, but you know that I have a strong interest in this, but not too much of a sidebar because again, what this means for the audit profession is important to consider. Thank you for watching today. Again, a different look, and we'll be back at a different time as I'm doing a lot of traveling. Maybe a different time, another different look, but same good conversations hopefully as we go through. Thanks for watching, everyone.